source of income, and, you know, the bottom line is if you're a songwriter in this country, the best way to make money is through getting your music on TV.
Some Flying Nun bands, though, were as far removed from being played in the background of Australian soaps as was possible. Roger Shepard was releasing their records purely on what he considered musical merit. The potential sales were irrelevant.
We decided to play this song that we kind of worked out. I went off to the bathroom to have a leak, came back. Meanwhile, the other two had decided to do a completely different song, didn't tell me. So we start off, so I'm doing what I thought was vaguely the bit that I was meant to do for this completely different song. And it worked so well, after that, I never looked back.
You know, we used to do lots of different music, and some of those bands were really quite ambitious, and other bands didn't have the same ambitions to be sort of, you know, commercially successful. And we released those records sort of, you know, with that in mind, being happy to sell, you know, 1,000 copies because of it, because we still thought the music was worthwhile. Skeptics. Fantastic band. Absolutely fantastic band. Made some great classic records. Amalgam must be one of my favourite all-time records. And live, they were mind-bogglingly loud and aggressive and over the top.
There was a definite attempt to, not so much in sound-wise, but in composition-wise, we didn't want to write songs that were the same as everybody else's songs. We didn't want to use the same sort of beats and stuff that everyone was using. So, I mean, it's much easier to write a song where the drummer goes all the way through, because no one has to think about counting beats or counting measures or anything like that. I've always thought that the Dunedin sound was a bit washed out and, to be perfectly honest, wimpy.
Instead, one of Rowan's major inspirations was Christchurch band The Gordons. Even though they only released 2 albums, many bands have claimed them as an influence.
The Gordons, big heroes to us. The Gordons.
In 1987, Bailter Space was formed. The second lineup featured 2 of the Gordons and Hamish Kilgar of The Clean. He left and he was replaced by the Gordons drummer, effectively making Bailter Space the Gordons Mark II. They moved to New York in 1993, where they still live. The diversity and number of acts on Flying Nun was splitting the focus of the label and proving difficult for Shepard to manage.
It was pretty chaotic, really. It was like catch-up. We were selling all these records, and there was sort of doing more and more releases and working with more and more art, you know, different bands and stuff. And just trying to catch up on the, you know, learning how to run a business. So I had no idea.
The Dead Sea recorded cheaply and had a small niche market in Europe and America that would recoup costs. What Bruce Russell of the Dead Sea saw as wasteful was spending large amounts of money on bands he thought had no chance of making the money back.
I just found it frankly staggering that they were willing to pour money into projects without really knowing where it was coming from or where it was going to go or how they were going to get it back.
Oftentimes the bands got pretty much a little too big for their boots, really. Decided they wanted a real producer, wanted a real recording, wanted a bit of money spent on them, and yeah, just the organic feel started to dissipate, really. I could never understand that. As far as I was concerned, why do that? Why ditch the people who know the most about your music in favour of someone who's never seen you before?
For some bands, I guess their ambitions were, you know, Chris was always going to do it very much on his own terms. And some bands were quite happy recording, you know, didn't have the ambition to sort of, you know, have a crack at it overseas or whatever. But the bands that really did have the ambition, then, you know, the studio budget was pretty significant to them. And we'd have to try and accommodate that.
Because the bands were the important thing, Roger would say, OK, I'll help you do this. And did, which was, for me, in many ways, the catalyst to the financial problems that Flying Nun had in later years.
Unfortunately, I got hornswoggled by some fairly mediocre talent as well, and that was really, I think, a part of the downfall, that went on happening, and over and over and over and over again. And things like, they did 2 or 3 records by a group called The Fold from Auckland, who were just dreary and dreadful. I never met anyone who liked them, and all their bloody records had full colour covers. And how did that happen? I don't know.
There was a sense in which the DIY thing had run its course. New Zealand had changed. The whole way, the record industry worked was changing along with every other business in New Zealand, and it just got a little bit too hard to have Chris Knox and his jandals walking around Auckland with a box of records, dropping them off at record shops, which is how it was done. That worked well enough in its time, but there was going to have to be proper distribution if it was going to go any further.
As well as the demand for bigger recording budgets demanded by some bands, the closing down of New Zealand's last record pressing plant caused further financial strain. Multinational record label WEA stepped in to help.
The family feel started to dissipate somewhat because the family had become this extended thing, which was a little less attractive than the hardcore nuclear family that we all started with. For me, having just hated working with WEA in the Toy Love years, to suddenly be working for WEA again was just like the biggest kick in the balls I could imagine, really.
By 1990, WEA had lost interest in Flying Nun, and Australian company Mushroom Records became involved, buying 50% of the label.
There were these records sitting there that weren't coming out because Roger couldn't really afford to pay the recording bills at Ride, so there was the JPS Size of Food record sitting there, the Bats Law of Things record was sitting there. These records we knew had been recorded but just weren't coming out.
With the financial security of Mushroom behind him, Roger Shepherd left for England to set up a UK branch of Flying Nun.
I think everyone was quite happy to see me go.
Roger was considered to be a bit out of control then, so going to England was going to leave the label in sort of more curatorial hands.
Then the man who started Flying Nun back in 1981 walked away from the company he created. Roger Shepherd had spent 16 years building up Flying Nun. Now it seemed to him the whole industry was driven by money.
Seeing how the business kind of was in Britain was a bit of a downer, and that it was very much success was very much manufactured and bought, and just became disinterested, really. Not on the Flying Nun side or the music side, but just the business generally, and really felt it was time for me to sort of go on and do something else.